You keep showing up, hoping they'll finally see your worth. But the more available you are, the more invisible you become. Today, you'll understand why disappearing might be the most powerful move you'll ever make. And Machiavelli knew it all along. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being too visible and still not being respected. You've made yourself available. Emotionally, physically, even spiritually. You've listened when they needed to vent. You've responded when they didn't deserve an answer. You've been there, always, and yet, somehow, you're still overlooked, undervalued, dismissed as optional. It's a silent kind of humiliation, the kind you swallow with a smile while something in you starts to rot. And here's what no one ever taught you sometimes. What you offer so freely becomes worthless. You've been tricked into believing that being present is the same as being needed, that being kind is the same as being respected, that availability guarantees recognition. But that's not how the human psyche works. Scarcity breeds value, mystery breeds desire, and presence without limit breeds contempt. The more they get of you, the less they feel you matter. It's not fair, but it's true. Respect isn't given to the loudest, the nicest, or the most present. It's given to the rare, the disciplined, the ones who know when to vanish. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He watched how rulers who constantly sought to be loved were devoured by their own people, while those who practiced strategic absence were feared, respected, and remembered. He wrote, "Men in general judge more from appearances than from reality. All men have eyes, but few have the gift of penetration." In other words, it's not who you are, it's the image you allow them to perceive. And when your image is always accessible, it stops inspiring curiosity and starts breeding indifference. You've tried being everywhere for everyone. You've tried over-explaining, over-giving, over-justifying your existence, and still, the respect never came. So maybe it's time to ask the forbidden question. What if your constant presence is the very reason they don't take you seriously? What if the only way to shift the dynamic is to disappear? This isn't about ghosting or revenge. It's not about silence as punishment. This is about reclaiming your value by breaking the cycle of emotional exposure. It's about stepping back not out of weakness, but out of power. It's about teaching the world, through your absence, that your presence is a privilege, not a given. Because when you disappear, really disappear, you force others to confront the vacuum you used to fill. And in that space, they finally realize what you were worth all along. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes you only need to vanish. And that's the truth no one tells you. If you want real respect, you might have to stop showing up so much. You might have to stop being so accessible. You might have to let them wonder. Let them miss you. Let them sit in the silence of your absence and question their place in your life. So now I ask you, are you ready to understand what Machiavelli always knew? That sometimes, disappearing is not a retreat. It's a rise. You were never just trying to be liked. You were trying to survive, to matter, to prove you had a place in someone else's world. So you gave, you stayed, you softened your voice, swallowed your rage, bent your boundaries until they snapped quietly beneath your skin. And you called it loyalty. You told yourself it was love. But deep down, you knew it was fear. Fear that if you disappeared, no one would come looking. It starts innocently enough. A few unanswered texts, a shift in tone. You respond faster. You say yes when you're tired. You become overly available. Not because they ask, but because the silence scares you. You believe that if you're not visibly useful, you'll become emotionally disposable. That if you're not holding everything together, you'll be left behind. And so you turn your nervous system into a sacrifice offered on the altar of someone else's comfort. Psychologists call it fawn response, a trauma-driven behavior where, instead of fighting or fleeing, you please, constantly, automatically. UCLA researchers found that individuals with unresolved abandonment wounds often equate love with service. They overfunction, over-explain, over-exist. But what they don't realize is that this overextension doesn't earn respect. It silently erodes it. Machiavelli, centuries before modern psychology, warned us about this. He who seeks to be loved at all costs becomes weak, vulnerable to manipulation, and forgettable. For him, power wasn't built on endless giving. It was built on knowing when to retreat, when to vanish, when to create enough distance for others to feel your absence and remember your weight. And here's the paradox. The more you show up without being asked, the more you become invisible. Your constant presence dulls their perception. You're no longer a choice, you're an assumption, a background character in your own life. You serve, but you're not honored. You support, but you're not seen. And the scariest part is how normal it begins to feel. This quiet kind of erasure that looks like care on the surface, but tastes like shame when you're alone. What you thought was loyalty may have been self-abandonment rehearsed until it felt noble. But here's the shift, and it's not easy to swallow. The respect you're chasing won't come through more effort. It won't come through deeper sacrifice. It begins the moment you stop proving yourself. The moment you pull back, not to punish, but to protect what's left. If this is making sense to you, if it's hitting where words usually don't, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It's a small way to help this message reach who's been carrying this weight in silence for too long. And we're just getting started. They told you that disappearing means giving up, that stepping away is weakness, that silence is retreat. But that's because they benefit from your presence, your constant availability, your predictable responses, your endless emotional labor. They don't want you to realize the truth, that your absence has more power than all your efforts combined. To disappear, consciously and deliberately, is not to run, it's to reclaim. In psychological terms, it's an act of boundary restoration. Dr. Ramani Durvashala, clinical psychologist and expert in narcissistic abuse, explains that strategic withdrawal is often the only way to reset distorted relational dynamics. When someone has gotten too used to your compliance, your emotional presence becomes background noise. By stepping away, you shift the entire balance. You interrupt the pattern. You force recognition. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He believed that presence breeds expectation, and expectation breeds entitlement. The prince must learn to be feared in his absence as much as in his presence, he wrote. Meaning, if they can only value you when you're around, they never really valued you. True power is when your silence creates more impact than your words ever could. In modern terms, this is psychological scarcity, the principle that people assign greater value to what they no longer have easy access to. Research from Stanford University confirms that when people are deprived of something they once took for granted, their perception of its worth increases dramatically. This isn't manipulation, it's reality, and you've been living on the wrong side of it. You've been giving too much of yourself, too often, to people who never earned it. And the longer you stay present in spaces that don't honor you, the more you teach others to forget your value. But when you vanish, not in anger, not in desperation, but in clarity, something shifts. The silence becomes a mirror. They start seeing what they refuse to acknowledge, not because you forced them to, but because you stopped performing for their comfort. And let's be honest, it terrifies you. The thought of not responding, not explaining, not showing up. But ask yourself, what has your constant presence truly earned you? Real respect, or just deeper invisibility? There's a difference between being abandoned and choosing to walk away. The first is trauma. The second is strategy. The world taught you that silence equals rejection, but that was a lie. The truth is, silence is power, not the passive kind, the kind that destabilizes people who depended on your emotional availability to stay in control. When you learn to disappear with intention, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop giving discounts on your presence. You stop hoping they'll change and start protecting your own energy like it's sacred. Because it is. And here's the secret no one wants to admit. The people who respect you most are the ones who've had to live without you. Not because you wanted to hurt them, but because you finally understood that real power doesn't chase. It withdraws and watches who follows. You were taught that disappearing makes you cold, that creating distance makes you selfish, that silence is a form of cruelty. But ask yourself, who gave you that script, and who benefits from you believing it? Because behind that idea of goodness you've been performing your whole life, there's a very specific kind of prison, one built not with walls, but with morals you never chose. From a young age, many are conditioned to believe that being kind means being endlessly available, that saying no is rejection, that walking away is betrayal. These aren't ethical truths, they're control mechanisms. Michel Foucault called it disciplinary power, the invisible systems that teach you to monitor yourself, punish yourself, doubt your instincts, just to remain accepted. In other words, they don't need to chain you, they just need you to feel guilty for unlocking the door, and this guilt is not yours, it was given to you, passed down through culture, religion, family patterns. a morality designed to shape you into something tame, predictable, digestible, safe, a version of you that's agreeable even while it's breaking, the obedient one, the understanding one, the one who gives second chances to people who wouldn't give you a first. But Machiavelli, he didn't care about being morally adored, he cared about not being overthrown, about staying in power, even if it meant breaking expectations. A wise ruler, he wrote, must learn how not to be good, not to become cruel, but to avoid being devoured, because a ruler who follows the rules made for peasants doesn't last long on the throne. And maybe that's what you've been doing, playing by rules written by people who never had to survive what you did. The morality you inherited was built to keep you small, but the version of you who's trying to rise, that one can't afford to be ruled by fear, masked as virtue. Let's be clear, kindness isn't weakness, but when your kindness is driven by the need to avoid conflict, rejection, or abandonment, it's no longer compassion. It's self-sabotage in disguise, and the world doesn't reward you for being endlessly good. It forgets you. To reclaim your power, you'll have to betray that internalized code. You'll have to sit with the discomfort of not explaining, not pleasing, not conforming. And that discomfort, it's not proof that you're doing something wrong. It's the symptom of liberation. The moment you stop asking for permission to exist, something changes, not just in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. You're no longer performing morality to feel worthy. You're choosing clarity over approval, boundaries over compliance, power over peacekeeping, because real respect doesn't come to those who follow every rule. It comes to those who aren't afraid to rewrite them. Not all power is loud. In fact, the most commanding type of power never announces itself. It withdraws, it pauses, it waits, and when it returns, it doesn't need to explain where it went. It's felt, not declared. That's what you were never taught. Silence isn't the absence of strength, it's often the sharpest form of it. You've been conditioned to fill every gap, every awkward pause, every message left unanswered. You explain yourself in paragraphs. You apologize for existing too much, then for not existing enough. And yet, none of it earns you more respect, only exhaustion. Because the person who talks too much, who reveals too much, who gives too much, loses gravity, loses presence. Their words become background noise. Machiavelli would have called this a tactical failure. In The Prince, he writes that a leader must learn to conceal his intentions, to be unreadable. Why? Because what cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. The modern equivalent, silence, is a form of psychological leverage. If they never know what you're thinking, they can't prepare their defense. If they don't know where you stand, they can't decide how to dismiss you. This isn't about manipulation, it's about value. And in a world that glorifies constant expression, restraint becomes a rebellion, a statement. When you stop reacting, you stop bleeding power. You become unknown. And the unknown is always more respected than the overly familiar. There's research to support this. A study published by the University of Chicago found that individuals who responded with calculated silence during high-pressure negotiations were perceived as more authoritative and emotionally in control. They were trusted more, not because they said the right things, but because they didn't rush to say anything at all. Silence forces others to sit with themselves, to hear their own voice echoing unanswered. And in that space, power shifts. The one who speaks the least becomes the one everyone listens to when they finally do speak. Not because of volume, but because of weight. You've wasted so many words trying to explain your value to people committed to misunderstanding you. And still, they didn't hear you. Maybe it's time to stop repeating yourself. Maybe it's time to leave the space empty and let the silence do the talking. That silence doesn't mean indifference. It means you've stopped begging to be seen. You've started seeing yourself, and in doing so, you've stepped out of the performance and into presence. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for coldness. He was teaching survival. He knew that power doesn't belong to the loudest, it belongs to the most controlled. And control isn't noise, it's precision. It's knowing when to be quiet, not because you're unsure, but because you've already decided. The people who truly command a room are rarely the ones who speak first. They're the ones whose silence makes everyone else second-guess their own noise. They walk in without a script and still take all the attention. So if they've stopped listening to you, maybe it's not because you haven't said enough. Maybe it's because you've said too much, for far too long. And the most powerful thing you can do now is vanish into silence. and let them wonder what version of you will come back, if any. Imagine a king who spends every day walking through the town square, shaking every hand, answering every question, explaining every decree. At first, the people adore him, but slowly, something shifts. He's too accessible, too familiar. The crown on his head starts to look more like decoration than authority. And one day, they stop bowing. Because no one fears what they fully understand. No one reveres what they constantly consume. That's what your life becomes when you make yourself emotionally available to everyone, all the time. A constant audience, a never-ending performance. You show up, you explain, you offer your heart, on demand, and they stop seeing it as a gift. It becomes a given. But Machiavelli would have warned you, rulers don't beg for recognition. They master the art of distance. He wrote, a prince should always be feared in such a way that, if he is not loved, at least he avoids being hated. The goal was never affection. It was unshakable presence. In today's world, we've confused emotional exposure with intimacy, but real power, real respect, comes from being selective, from choosing when and where to be seen. The king who's always at the gates becomes the servant. The one who is everywhere becomes nowhere. There's a psychological truth behind this. Research on authority perception from Columbia University reveals that people subconsciously associate scarcity with higher value. Leaders who are more elusive, not dismissive, but intentional, tend to be viewed as more competent, more respected, and paradoxically, more desired. You don't create reverence by being present all the time. You create it by choosing when not to be. You've been trying to hold on to connection by giving them more of you. But the more you give, the more invisible you become. They see you as dependable, accessible, safe, but never powerful, never sovereign. You're not ruling your emotional kingdom. You're being ruled by your need to please, and that need is what makes you forget your own throne. You trade command for company, authority for attention. You become the king who walks the streets begging to be seen, not realizing that presence is a resource, and yours is being drained. But imagine reversing that. Imagine becoming the ghost king, the one who's rarely seen, yet always felt. The one whose absence leaves a tension in the room. The one they wonder about when he's not there. That's not arrogance. That's architecture. You're shaping the space around you through discipline, not desperation. And here's the most brutal part. If you've been too visible for too long, they won't believe your silence at first. They'll test it, mock it, push against it. But if you hold it, if you protect that silence, something will shift. The respect you are begging for will arrive, but on different terms. On your terms. Because no one bows to a king who's always at their table. But everyone remembers the one who disappears without explanation, and leaves a throne behind that no one else can fill. Guilt is the last chain they place on you before you walk out the door. Not physical chains, not loud demands, but quiet expectations. The kind that whisper, you're being selfish. The kind that dress your silence as cruelty, and your distance as betrayal. But look closely. Who planted that guilt? Who taught you that your peace is only valid if it doesn't inconvenience anyone? You weren't born feeling guilty for choosing yourself. That was learned, conditioned, carved into you through years of being told that your worth is tied to your availability. That to be loved, you must always be reachable. That walking away, even from what's draining you, is a sin. But here's what they never told you. That guilt isn't always a signal you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that you're finally breaking free. According to the University of Pennsylvania's research on emotional boundaries, people raised in environments with blurred emotional roles often carry chronic guilt into adulthood. They feel responsible for other people's comfort, even at the expense of their own capacity. They apologize for resting. They justify saying no. They feel guilty for not answering a text fast enough, for setting a boundary, for choosing solitude. It's not kindness. It's emotional exhaustion disguised as empathy. Machiavelli would call this a weakness in character, not because you're soft, but because you've let morality be weaponized against you. In The Prince, he suggests that a ruler must at times act against compassion, against loyalty, even against religion, not out of cruelty, but to protect the state. Translate that into your life. Sometimes, to protect your emotional state, you'll have to act against what others expect from you, against the roles they've assigned you, against the guilt they've trained you to carry. They won't understand it at first, especially those who've benefited from your constant presence. They'll accuse you of being distant, cold, changed, and you'll feel that pull to go back, to explain, to make it easier for them. But if you do, the cycle continues. You vanish in their comfort. You disappear in your own story. Again, so no, disappearing is not abandonment. It's not manipulation. It's not revenge. It's survival. It's stepping out of a system that rewards your pain with temporary praise. It's remembering that your presence has weight, and that weight was never meant to be carried by everyone, especially not those who only notice it when it's gone. To break the guilt, you'll have to sit in discomfort. You'll have to resist the reflex to justify your silence. Let them feel confused. Let them wonder. That discomfort they feel, that's the part of them that forgot you were human, not a resource, not a function. And slowly, as the noise fades, you'll notice something. The space around you is quieter, not empty, just clean. And in that space, you begin to rebuild, not from guilt, but from sovereignty. Because Machiavelli wasn't teaching cruelty, he was teaching self-preservation. And in a world that thrives on your overexposure, sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is disappear without explanation, and not feel sorry for it. There comes a moment when explanation is no longer strength, it's surrender. You've spent years trying to make them understand your heart, your boundaries, your worth. But the ones who needed the explanation never truly valued the message, and the ones who valued you never needed that much convincing. Jung warned us, whatever you avoid becomes your master. And most people avoid solitude not because they dislike being alone, but because they're terrified of what might surface when no one's watching. Disappearing forces you to meet that self you've silenced under roles and expectations. It strips away the performance. It leaves you with the truth. And sometimes, that truth is this: the version of you they clung to was never the whole of who you are. The shadow isn't the enemy. The silence isn't the void. These are the terrains where your real identity waits, not the one molded by guilt or applause, but the one forged in rupture, in pause, in sacred distance. And once you enter that place, you stop trying to be understood. You start building presence that doesn't beg, energy that doesn't chase, boundaries that don't tremble. Machiavelli wasn't cold, he was surgical. He knew that to rule, one must be feared, not because of violence, but because of mystery. Predictability is weakness. And what is more predictable than the person who always shows up, who always explains, who never walks away? To be respected, you must let go of the version of you that was designed to be safe. That version made sense when survival required it, but now, it only delays your return to the throne. A throne built not by dominance but by absence, by the refusal to play roles that extract you piece by piece. You don't need to announce your departure. You don't need to write speeches explaining your silence. You simply stop. And in that stillness, a new kind of echo forms. One that doesn't ask, why did they leave? But instead, how did we forget their weight? Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet presence that remains long after you've gone. And if any part of this felt like it was written for you, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. It's not just support. It's a signal that you're ready to stop apologizing for your silence and start using it. After all, the crown isn't earned by who shouts the loudest, but by who disappears and is still remembered. If this spoke to something you've been carrying in silence, watch the next videos. They go even deeper into the patterns you've been trying to break alone.